We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Hello and welcome to Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record. We've got three guests this week. We've got Hannah Roger, who's the political editor of the Sunday Mail. We've got Mark Smith in the middle, who's the head of news for the Daily Record. And of course, we've got our favourite right-wing bogeyman, Douglas Dickey of the Scottish Daily Express. So there's a lot to discuss, so let's get cracking. First of all, with Iran, just to summarise where we are, because it's quite a fast-moving situation. Both Israel and the US have both launched attacks on Iran. There's now a ceasefire of sorts. There seems to be a bit of de-escalation, which is what the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer wanted, but where it goes from here, no one really knows. Hannah, I don't know what you think, but I'm a bit torn on this. My head says that every time the US intervenes in the Middle East, it's a complete and utter disaster. You just have to look back to Iraq. But my heart says that Iran is run by this evil, appalling regime. It cannot be allowed to have a nuclear bomb because that would be a disaster for the world. So instinctively, I'm perhaps more sympathetic to some sort of intervention eventually. What's your thoughts on it?
Oh, where do you want me to start? I think that, the reasons for the strike on Iran by Israel was completely false. I think it was made up. That all the sort of experts, the IAEA, etc., even the American sort of intelligence services were saying that Iran is not like minutes away from a nuclear bomb, nuclear weapons, which is what was the sort of basis for the attack. And then the argument for the strikes initially, which is this deterring against nuclear weapons, is not the same argument as wanting regime change in Iran. And I think that there's a lot of confusion about the real reasons why this has been taking place. And also I think that Israel, launched this initially to A, disrupt the strikes, or the talks, between Iran and the US, and B, to distract from what they're doing in Gaza.
You're right, though. I mean, Iran are not days away from having a bomb, but they might be years away. I mean, is some sort of intervention just not inevitable at some point? So why not do it now?
I mean, I just think like the reasons for the strike were bogus, and why do it now when you're in the middle of a war with in Gaza?
Another reason to be dubious about it is the fact that Donald Trump's in the White House. I mean, if it was Obama, people might be a bit more sympathetic, open-minded, but this guy just can't see anything through. His motivations tend to be questionable. He changes his mind left, right and centre. I mean, one day he's backing Israel, then he's on camera using the F word to slag them off. I mean, can anything good come from this?
Trump's involvement in running a supporters bus would worry me if we were going to the Hampden for the final, right? So I wouldn't put him in charge of a fish supper, right? So it worries me that he's anywhere near anything of any import. However, I think he is right to try his best to halt Iran's nuclear ambitions. Now, I think Starmer is probably nearer the position that's sensible, which is let's try and get Iran back round the negotiating table. Let's try and stop this nuclear programme that Iran has been pursuing. And let's not beat about the bush. They're not doing it because they want to keep the lights on in Tehran. They are doing it because they want to develop a nuclear weapon. Now, that is something that cannot be allowed to happen. People forget this Iranian regime came in 1979. The first thing they did was murder 5,000 communists and trade unionists and working class left-wing people. Anyone on the left who supports this regime or is flag-waving for them needs a history lesson and a boot up the arse, right? But second point is, Trump's right to try and stop that programme. Did he have to bang in with the buster bombs and all that? Maybe there was a diplomatic solution, but you have to remember that's been tried before with Barack Obama. That deal unravelled. Now,
and that was about delaying the programme. It wasn't about get
You know,
rid of it.
so
Just put the brakes on it.
maybe somebody somewhere, and I'm going to shock you here by saying maybe Trump's the guy just to do it. He might have done it for the wrong reasons. He might have done it because he's off his head. But somebody somewhere in the world, in the global community, had to say this programme has to stop. So I think that whether or not this was the right tactic, something had to be done. And I think where Starmer is now, though, is encouraging me, because Starmer is saying, I think, the correct thing, which is this programme needs to be halted. He is trying to build an international coalition for reopening talks. And I think that's where it will now go. But
Do you not
something
think
to
so?
give.
Like, can there be talks? Like, can Iran be,
Bombed to the negotiating table.
well, not necessarily, but there are people who say, oh, well, there should have been a diplomatic response to this rather than just going in with the weapons. But as you say, it's been tried before, and Iran on this issue clearly has shown it can't really be trusted because it's making secret factories and enriching uranium to levels they don't need, and they say that they're doing things, or they're saying they're complying with inspections when actually they've got all these other secret factories that they didn't tell anyone
I think
about.
the negotiations with the Iranians will be far more effective if they know there's a B-52 bomber about to land on them if they don't do as they're told. Now, I realise that's no very popular maybe view among progressives, but that is the situation we find ourselves in. And if you want a safer world, if you want non-proliferation, sometimes you have to back it up with force of arms. And I think in this case, it's legitimate that the democratic countries demonstrated that and showed that this is not something that will be tolerated. That's not to say, however, that we should give Israel a free pass.
No.
Netanyahu's regime in Israel is just as destabilising to the world order. They've slaughtered 400,000 people in Gaza. This is not giving him a free pass. And it would certainly be alarming if Trump's activities somehow allowed the Israelis to entirely rule the roost in the Middle East.
It's totally
That would be a
possible.
worry.
It's totally possible to be very critical of Netanyahu's actions in Gaza, while at the same time making clear that Iran cannot be allowed a nuclear weapon.
It's like an Old Firm
They
Cup
must
final.
be- they
You
must
can
be
hate
stood
both
up.
sides.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's one of the problems a lot on the left here have got with this, because I've seen it in Facebook, people changing their Facebook profile to Iranian flags. It's mental, and it's because of Israel's involvement. Now, we could all sit here all day and debate Israel, but on this occasion, I kind of disagree with Hannah in the sense that they're not minutes away from a nuclear bomb, but they are trying to develop one. And we cannot, for me, it just boils down to we cannot let Iran have a nuclear bomb. That would be the most disastrous thing they could imagine. So, in that sense, we need to make sure that they know that we're serious. There's a bit of me wonders if Iran's trying to goad the US in a way, almost saying, well, I think the best thing that could happen for the Iranian regime is that Trump goes full on, all right, well, let's get boots on the ground in Iran and let's, escalate this. That would be manna from heaven for the Iranian regime. So you've got to be careful in how you, tackle this. But I think ultimately, there's a ceasefire in place now. Let's hope it holds. Let's hope we get back down the negotiating table. But you've got to be clear with Iran. You can't push your foot around them.
Yeah, the question, they cannot be allowed to have a nuclear bomb. The only question is, how do you actually go about stopping them? Do you get them around the negotiating table? We've tried that before, didn't quite work out. Or do you take military action, which is fraught with risk? But if you try and look at it from Iran's perspective, this is not only a national status symbol, having a nuclear weapon. It's about having power in a very explosive, chaotic region. And if they were allowed to have that, the world would change forever. Mm-hmm. So I'm not a fan of Donald Trump at all. I think he's a horrible guy. But
do you?
I would back Trump every day of the week over Iran.
I think he's just, can I say this, a bit of a fanny, right? Obviously, but see what he said yesterday about, basically these two nations have been fighting each other for so long, they don't have a bloody clue what it is they're, they've lost all perspective on this, and then obviously used the F-bomb and whatnot. But I thought, actually on that specific point, I completely agree with him, and I think that he came across really quite well.
Every now and again, there's like almost as if Trump's got this character.
Yeah.
And every now and again he breaks character just a tiny bit, and you get to see a wee bit of maybe there is something there, to kind of cling on to. I think I remember seeing it when they had that debate and Joe Biden was all over the place, and you seen Trump kind of like actually taken aback by it, and he could have went in for the kill there, but it was almost like, this is weird. And I think you've seen it there. You've seen the real Trump, a guy like what the.
Yeah, and also the fact he was criticising Israel and Iran, and I think that got
I mean, and what that shows is, I think there could be an Atlanticist alliance forming here, and I think Starmer again has positioned, like as he did with trade, he's positioning himself quite nicely between Europe and America, and that can be to Britain's benefit. I realise there will be people who say you should never deal with Trump. We're better to oppose him in every step of the way. I think Starmer's playing a cleverer game than that. He wants to keep the US on side as a traditional ally of Britain's, but he also wants to keep Trump on side as somebody who can be useful for Britain and where we now stand out with the European Union.
Trump can ever be useful for Britain.
Well, he gave us a deal on trade, which gives us a competitive advantage over the French and the Germans.
Yeah,
now, that's useful.
Yeah, but that's because he has whacked a load of tariffs onto them.
Oh, aye, but
he's just playing monopoly with the world economy.
Anyways.
The biggest issue with Trump is he might change his mind by tomorrow and thought, actually, you know what, let's bomb Tehran, or that's.
If it was Obama or Clinton, I'd have more faith in it. With Trump, he's so unpredictable. You just know what he's going to do next.
Yeah,
a broken clock can be right twice a day.
A broken what?
Clock is right twice a day. So
I thought you dropped the C-ball there.
So we're always looking for a Holyrood angle on international affairs. And I think we do have one Sunday Mail splash at the weekend. Former First Minister Humza Yousaf. I'm paraphrasing because he didn't quite say this, but this was the intention. The US military does use Prestwick Airport for refueling in terms of going about its business. I think Humza Yousaf was basically saying that US aircraft should not be allowed to refuel in Prestwick if they're going to be helping Israel bomb Iran. Now, I'm not even sure that the Scottish Government would have the power to stop the US from using Prestwick. I mean,
but it owns Prestwick.
Yeah, but in the context of foreign affairs and national security, I'm pretty sure that the UK government could overrule that. But let's just say the Scottish Government does have that power. I mean, basically, Humza is saying that we should not allow our closest ally for over 50 years to use an airport to basically launch military action against one of the most evil regimes in the world. I mean, if Swinney was to do that, he'd be the toast of Tehran. We'd be the laughingstock of the world. It's just another intervention that just reeks of student politics. It's just dreadful stuff from Humza. What do you think, Dougie?
Well, yeah. I mean, Paul, I think you've kind of summed it up for me. The main thing being as well that there's no way the Scottish Government would stop them using it, because Prestwick, the only reason Prestwick's profitable is because it's used by the US military. So it's basic economics tells you it's not going to happen. This is a problem I was talking about earlier on. People are seeing Israel are involved in this, and so they immediately want to take the other side. If as far as I'm concerned, if we were to stop American planes fueling at Prestwick, that would be siding with Iran. But as far as I'm concerned,
absolutely
siding with Iran.
Absolutely.
What? Have you two gone mad here?
Of course it would. How else would it be seen?
No, they're not. Scotland would not be siding with Iran if it said, right, America, we don't want you to refuel and bring, bombs to Israel. And, regardless of what Israel is doing with them, like, the point is...
What would be the point of being allies? What would the point of the UK being allies with America if we won't let their planes refuel here? America's a NATO ally.
I don't think you can make the jump by saying Scotland would be an ally of Iran if it had an issue.
In this conflict, you know, or the conflict as it was, the 12-day war, which was probably actually 13-day war, but we'll kind of gloss over that.
I mean, look, it was a good piece. See, in the article, he criticised Israel.
Yeah, of course.
And he criticised the US. Did he criticise Iran?
Yeah.
I can't. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed to be much more focused on the other two countries rather than.
Well, yeah, it was much more focused on that.
The evil
But actually
theocracy in the
read
Middle
what
East.
it said, he explicitly said, "This is not me in support of the Iranian regime." You know, so if you actually read the article,
No, I
you
did,
see-
but he seemed to be more critical of Israel and the US than Iran. I mean, the issue is, should Iran be allowed a nuclear weapon? That's the issue at hand here. And to stop a major ally like the US from refueling, I just think it's nonsensical.
Right, somebody else go. I'm actually about to scream. So somebody who's not even read the bloody story is saying like, you know,
I thought it was a great tale.
No, I never
Right,
criticised the
right,
story.
right.
I'm criticising what the person
Well,
said
you
in the piece.
clearly haven't read it. If you're saying, "Oh, you didn't speak about Iran," he
No,
did.
I'm asking if he did, and what I'm saying is he seemed to be more critical of Israel and the US than Iran. That was my perception of it.
Yeah, he might have been, but that doesn't mean he's not critical of Iran as
Simply
well.
asking the question. Smitty, over to you.
I'm just amazed that any plane takes off on time for Prestwick Airport. Because normally when I'm doing there, I'm at least 4 or 5 pints in before the plane gets anywhere near taking off.
Yeah.
So there we are.
I think
Honestly,
it's
even
a big-
open.
Well, that's good to see that. I'm only joking. Great airport. I used to cover that patch. And I listen because
Great airport.
Great
Don't
airport.
make me start on you as well, for goodness.
I used to work for the Air Advertiser back in my younger days. We used to do a lot of stories, but even at that time, we're talking in ancient history because I'm an old person. There were big issues around the US using Prestwick Airport for rendition flights for torture.
Yeah.
Which I know, Hannah, you've covered a lot. Prestwick Airport's been used by the US military for all sorts of things. I don't think it does Britain any harm sometimes to turn around to America and say, you know what, we're not taking part in this adventure. I think, as I've said before, that the attempt to try and get Tehran back round the table and end its nuclear ambitions justified some form of intervention, and it would have been a very tough thing for Starmer. And let's face it would have been Starmer. I don't think it would ever have been Swinney. He'd have been lucky if he'd have been told about it after it. But I think it would have been very unwise of Starmer to block that. But I think Hamza Yousaf makes legitimate points, and I think Prestwick has been used for lots of naughty stuff that we don't even know about. So I think it's good that stuff gets aired.
Well, that's the point as well about, for example, the rendition flights. Would you agree with that? That because America's an ally, we should just let them use the airport for whatever they want? You know, if they go and snatch up people from the streets and use Prestwick to deport them and torture them, is that okay?
Well, I mean, it's
You think that's a great thing?
Yeah. Do you think they should be
All
allowed
of me torture.
to
I
do it
think,
all the
I
time?
think, I think America's an ally. America's involved right now in a military.
Yeah, but aside
operation.
from that, your argument was America's
But
an
you're
ally.
not
and
talking
we
about
can't
a
go-
military operation.
No, well, I'm
You're
asking.
talking about moving people
Yeah, but
about.
do
I
you
mean, I
think-
doubt we would even know what's on those planes. I think you would need to just stop American planes, full stop.
So
from mine
that's what I'm
Prestwick.
saying by that argument.
I'm not saying
we
it's
should
right,
Just
I'm
let
just
them
saying that
use
we should-
Prestwick for whatever purpose they want and never block them from doing so.
Well, I think it'd be very difficult to block them because they're a military ally. It'd be very difficult to stop their military planes from using it. I think it'd be almost impossible. It would make a mockery of NATO. It would make a mockery of any, relationship we've got with them. That doesn't mean I agree with everything that goes through Prestwick or agree with everything that America does. It just means that, America is our number one ally. So, I mean, where does it stop? If we stop them using Prestwick, should we stop them using our intelligence?
There are,
If
like,
they're using
other
our
places that
intelligence,
they can use in the
you know,
UK, though,
so what's the point then?
because Scotland is not England.
But Scotland is the UK, and
Uh-huh.
UK is
But we've got
you
a
know,
different government in Scotland.
but we
and
don't have a different
Scottish-
government. We have a UK government and we have a Scottish executive that just gets called a
We don't
government.
have a Scottish
We
executive.
do. We have a Scottish executive that gets called the Scottish government because Alex Salmond changed the name 18 years ago.
Look, it's the Scottish government. I mean, everyone.
But my point is, foreign affairs, defence is reserved to Westminster. So they would just use another airport in the UK
That's what I'm
So
saying.
what's the
Like,
point?
you could use like
Yeah, they could, but why not use Prestwick? Why is it okay for them to use
I'm saying
these
if the
flights
Scottish
down south?
government I'm not saying it's okay.
No.
I, unlike you, do not think America should be allowed to use Prestwick willy-nilly for whatever the hell they like, including, extraordinary renditions and whatnot. But if it's a matter of respect, if the Scottish government, these are all hypotheticals, if the Scottish government said, we do not want US to use our airport because we believe that they're using it to facilitate, for example, the war in Iran or, aids what's going on in Gaza, for example, whatever, then there are other sites in other parts of the UK that they could use.
I think, Paul, put it best, it would make us an absolute laughingstock. It would
Yeah,
make Scotland a
maybe.
laughingstock.
Well, look, I wouldn't give America carte blanche. If they want to use Prestwick in order to bomb France,
Yeah.
be no. But we're talking about Iran here. It's an evil regime, and I think that it would have looked terrible if or in the future, if we say, no, you can't use this airport to refuel. But anyway, moving on from Iran to a lighter subject, the welfare cuts, which, let's face it, is hotting up now. Yes. So, I mean, there's a planned vote next week. I'm not sure if this vote is actually going to take place now.
Yeah.
The gist of it is over £5 billion of cuts to disability and sickness benefits. Over 100 Labour MPs are planning to rebel. Over, I think, 10 are Scottish MPs as well, or MPs based in Scottish constituencies. There's talk of concessions, and in the last hour there's even talk that they might pull the welfare bill altogether, which would be a remarkable U-turn. I don't know what you think, Smitty, but Starmer's got himself into an awful lot of bother with this.
Yes.
People can buy into the general principle of helping people back to work, that if you're out of work but capable of work, that the actions of the state should be help you get a job. But under these plans, people who should be on disability and sickness benefits would be losing money. Now, it's been billed as a get back to work agenda, yet disabled workers on PIP will be losing cash. I mean, just intellectually, it's all over the place. Labour MPs are rebelling, they're in uproar, and right now, it wouldn't surprise me if they pull it.
I think most people who work for a living would have some sympathy with the view that if you're at it and you can actually work, then you should, right? And I think most folk would agree with that, right? However, Labour have gone about this and it's in the wrong way. They got a fright with the winter fuel payment row. That really backfired on them. They had to do an almost complete U-turn on it. And I think they thought, when Rachel Reeves comes in, if we can present Rachel as the Iron Chancellor Mark II, that'll be a good start for Labour and it won't frighten the right-wing press, because we all know how much they're just waiting to pounce on Labour.
That's you,
every
Dougie.
wrong move. Oh, that's you, mate. Aye, that's right. Just to make that clear. So I think in coming into power and immediately hammering winter fuel payment, immediately hammering disabled benefits, they were seeking to give the right-wing press some red meat, and then they could then say, look, we're great, we're going to be hard on fiscal rules, we're going to be tough on spending. Great. It was an absolute nightmare for them. All they did was gift reform an absolute bonus, because it looked like they were stealing money from pensioners. Now, they were entirely right to say, why are we giving billions of pounds to rich pensioners? I've heard a statistic, I don't know if it's true, that 1 in 4 pensioners are millionaires. Don't know if that's true, but I'll put it there anyway. But, there's a lot of rich pensioners. So Labour...
This week's episode, misinformation.
Yeah, sorry, we'll get checked later. But, Labour, I think, thought it would be a vote winner. It turns out it was an absolute disaster and was an absolute gift to Farage, who's now lying to people that he's the hero of the pensioners. What a load of tosh that is. So, they did it. They made a mistake with winter fuel. I'd have thought after that debacle they would have been a lot more savvy when it comes to disability benefits. I think they rightly alighted upon disability benefits as a massive area of government spending which needs to be looked at. And by the way, I think there is a case that a lot of young people, or maybe especially after COVID, are entering into the world of work and really not not liking it, not wanting to go for it, and sort of making it a lifestyle choice not to work. Now, I'm not saying that's widespread, and I'm certainly not saying that applies to everyone on disability benefits. But Labour are right to look at that and say, right, how can we incentivise these young people to get into the world of work? It's the one thing in life that's guaranteed to make your life better, to improve your life chances. We spoke to Ian Murray before the election about this very thing. Worklessness is a massive problem, and Labour are right to try and get to grips with it. Where I think they've gone wrong is, as you say, this bill does not really do much of that. All it does is strip money away from folk who are already skint. And
it's a cost-saving exercise.
Aye, it's
to disabled people.
That's right. Now, if they really want to incentivise people to work, didn't take away in-work benefits. You know, they're the ones that you should keep. You know, so I suppose I'm expressing some sympathy with Labour's intentions here.
Yeah, I agree.
But they have gone about it in the wrong way. And left-wing Labour MPs, I'm sure they'll be speaking to the Sunday Mail on Sunday. Yeah. They will want to say this is not the right way to do it. And I mean, guys like Brian Leishman, I presume you'll be speaking to.
Our columnist, Brian Leishman.
Yes, exactly.
The leash.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I actually agree with everything you said. You know, A, it's a very un-Labour policy. B, they've just gone about it completely the wrong way, and instead of pitching it as a way to, make the benefit system fairer and to incentivize people into work, it now does just look as if they're trying to save money by taking, money away from disabled people, and it's completely wrong.
I don't know, we were talking about the winter fuel payment. You touched this, yes.
I know.
And I just don't detect the same anger with this, the same outrage as it was with the winter fuel payment. I don't at all, no. And I think that's because it was something that I think, was it this morning or yesterday, that I actually, less than half of people in the UK want to see the welfare bill boosted. And that's the first time, I think, since the 1990s when this kind of social attitude survey started getting published. I don't think there is the same anger at it.
Do you think it's because
the problem is politically, from Starmer's point of view, he's facing this big rebellion, and that's why he's going to pull, unlike the winter fuel payment, which they've kind of backtracked on because it was going to lose him the next election, even though it was 5 years ago. Sorry, Hannah.
No, I was just going to ask, do you think you're saying, you don't see as much anger, and you kind of touched on this a bit. Do you think that there's still this idea that, the majority of people who are on benefits are all at it?
Yeah, whereas the winter fuel payment was everyone's granny and granddad, and they were like, well, hold on a minute, my granny and granddad have paid into the state for 60 years, why shouldn't they get a wee bit off?
Because I just think this attitude about, I believe that almost everyone who receives some sort of benefits deserves those benefits. I do not believe that they're at it, but there is, I feel like I'm in the minority there.
I think there is a feeling that during COVID, there's a generation that's possibly come through for whom work is an optional thing. And
how are they claiming the benefits?
And I think a lot of them, as you know, there's a lot of them claim to have like anxiety or whatever, so they can't work. But that's not to say that people with mental health issues who's not being received disability benefit. But if you've got a whole generation of young people coming through, and a big number of them are not being helped into the world of work because they initially are put on a disability benefit, that can end up being something that actually stops them progressing in life. And I think Labour's great challenge is to say to these kids, and there are a lot of them that I think could have very fruitful careers and good jobs. It's Labour's challenge to say to these kids, I think, benefits is not the best thing for you. And I think I know that's a wee bit unorthodox for someone on the left, but I think that's a useful thing that Labour can do. But that's not to say that people who have mental health problems shouldn't be in receipt of benefits. But there is a challenge there for Labour. If a lot of kids aren't working, these are the taxpayers of tomorrow. Surely Labour's key priority should be getting these kids into work.
I think the challenge with any welfare reform is, how do you distinguish between the folk that you want to nudge back into work and the folk who cannot work and need support?
That's the tough part.
And so, it's just, how do you kind of target the folk who should be without harming the people who simply cannot do a day's
Sorry.
work.
No, I was going to say, like, if they want to encourage people who've got, say, minor mental health problems, but that do make it difficult to engage in the world, that's a whole different issue with mental health services, and they would need to put funding into
That's right.
improving that. So it's all about
Incentivising,
change, isn't it?
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
you can't
I
just
do
take
agree.
the benefits away and say, right, we don't believe that your anxiety means you can't work, so off you go.
Exactly. It
and
can't
give
all
them
be
nothing.
stick. You need some carrot, And if the carrots are no there, then you're just making folk poorer by hitting them with the benefits.
Yeah.
To take a kind of broader look at it, we're getting very into the kind of detail here, but what Smitty was saying is backed up by the statistics. There has been a massive increase in the welfare bill since COVID. It's
Is it because of
forecast
mental
to
health,
go-
or is it because of actual more
Well,
COVID or like physical illnesses?
I mean, I don't know that
Okay.
offhand, but it has increased, and it's forecast to increase even further by kind of I can't remember the figures, but a kind of 2030 figure on it. I think it was 70 billion or something. And I think there's sometimes a bit of myth about the welfare budget on kind of both sides of the debate. So on the right they'll say, we spend all this money and we spend the majority of money on welfare, whereas people on the left will say actually the welfare bill is a tiny proportion of our total spend. It is a tiny proportion in terms of the the grand scheme, but it's still more than we spend on defence. It's still more than we spend on education. It is a substantial bill. I think it's 7.1% or something of government spending.
It's
So-
not that tiny, really, is it?
Well, no, but obviously it's it's not the majority.
No.
It's a minority, but it is a fair whack of government spending goes in welfare. So the challenge is to make sure not just to cut the bill now, but to make sure that the bill's manageable in 10 years' time, and you can only do that by getting people back into work.
I think another problem for Labour is that if you look at the last Tory government, say Cameron, Osborne era, they successfully framed their welfare reforms as shirkers versus grafters. It was unfair, but that's how they presented it. I think Labour, in terms of their reforms, it's very much seen as they're taking cash off disabled people. I think the way they're trying to portray it is not how it's landing with the public. I think it's seen as being nasty and not the sort of thing that a Labour government should do. And I think that's another problem for Anas Sarwar on the back of winter fuel, WASPy, just more controversy coming down the road from London, and this idea that, you'll get change from Labour, but it's not the change that you were expecting, which harms his chances of persuading enough voters next year to put him in boot house.
I mean, that is Sarwar's historic challenge. If he can create a narrative before the Holyrood election that your mobbing reform that you love so much, and the SNP are two identity politics, kind of protest parties. But if he can go into that election and say Labour is the party of good government, we're the party of fairness, equality, redistribution, which is a word you didn't hear much of the Labour Party these days, then I think Sarwar has a chance of driving that narrative and maybe shocking us all in the next election. But every time Labour in England screw up another policy, it makes his job that much harder. And I've got a lot of sympathy. I think Sarwar is one of the good guys in Scottish politics, and I think he's got a chance to do good things. But he'll struggle if he keeps getting battered like that from London.
Final subject, there were some horror stats published yesterday which reflect incredibly badly again on the Scottish Government. House building down again. And I think we had, is it the worst cancer waiting stats in record? Yeah. So on two key issues, housing and the NHS, the SNP government is simply not cutting it. If next year was on their record, they'd be out in the rear.
Well, sexual assaults are also up as well, so that was another kind of poor stat for them. I was going to say, when Smitty was talking about Anas Sarwar there, from Anas Sarwar's point of view, it's bad for him what's happening down south. On the other hand, up here he's got plenty to work with because we've got a health secretary who's off on a jolly to Japan. Well, we've got the worst cancer waiting times on record. We've got a First Minister who frankly looks increasingly out of ideas. he's looking increasingly weak. John Swinney is a lot of things, but I don't think he's a leader. And whatever you think of him, Alex Salmon was a leader. Whatever you think of her, Nicola Sturgeon was a leader. John Swinney doesn't appear.
I think he's a leader. I do think he's a leader.
I don't think he's a very good one. And I think that is...
Many of his problems are because of his predecessors.
Yeah, his predecessors who he was happy to
don't
serve under.
see that,
Quite,
right?
yeah.
No.
And also his predecessors who he served under. You
Yeah.
know,
I think
he worked under.
one issue where Swinney has been landed an absolute pig in a poke is housing. For a Scottish devolved government, since 1999 we've had a devolved Scottish government, for that whole time, housing has been an absolute disaster zone of a policy area. You know, Maggie sold off all the council houses, and if that money had gone back into building proper social housing, we wouldn't be in this pickle that we're in now. So that's another thing to thank the Tories for and the Daily Express. You know, still. I must admit, my mum and dad bought their council houses.
Actually,
My mum and dad I grew up in a Bott Council house.
So that's it. So did loads of us. You know, and it was a very popular policy, but it was badly executed, and that none of the proceeds from it went back into building new social housing. So for 20 years, Scotland is desperately short of decent social housing, and for none of the devolved governments, I'm talking about Labour, Lib Dem, and the subsequent SNP administrations, for none of them to really get to grips with that is an absolute disgraceful failure of the devolution project, because that is something where we could have really went off on our own and said, right, we're going to refocus on social housing. It's needed, it's necessary, it's one of the key things that keeps society cohesive. It's worth spending a lot of money on. Instead of that, successive governments in Scotland of all parties have basically stuck with the Tory line. Social housing's rubbish. Buy your own house, and if you can't afford to do that, hell mend you. That's no good enough. And although there's more nuance to the housing system than that, I know that governments have tried to get to grips with it, but never in a fundamental, revolutionary way that could really have changed Scotland for the better. That's a historic failing. Swinney needs to get a grip of that.
It's hard to see what the SNP's case is going to be for re-election.
Labour down south.
Well, yeah, there's that. But in terms of their own record, education,
Yeah, but
health service,
they
housing.
never want to talk about their own record during election campaigns because it's shite, basically.
Yeah.
So they just try and say, vote for the SNP to remove the Tories, vote for the SNP to block reform.
Send a message.
Yeah, exactly. So
They're
try and-
Independence,
people
line
do it.
1, page 1 of their manifesto.
They're desperate for this next Holyrood election to be a tribal vote between them on one side as the main representative of the nationalist bloc and the rest of the other parties who will have varying degrees of success on the union side. They're desperate for it to be fought on that. And you know what? It might work because 60% of people apparently in the polls want independence. And they want it because of historic failures by UK governments. I mean, I think if Labour start to do better and get a bit, start to put money back in people's pockets, start to make a difference. And Starmer, I think, is increasingly looking like, he's done quite good stuff on the global stage. That's where Labour's opportunity lies. But the SNP will be desperate to make this an independence election, and they'll be desperate to talk up reform, just like the Express.
How credible will that be, though, given the Supreme Court judgment made clear that independence, Indiref 2 are reserved issues? If they try and use a devolved election in the light of that, I mean,
it's fundamentally dishonest to do that. It's fundamentally
the point is there is like they will try, of course, right? But we've kind of already seen, and you can see the frustration from kind of SNP supporters, independence campaigners. There is no new plan to actually achieve independence. So even though there's the people who support it, that percentage seems to be going up slightly. I don't know if it's going to be strong enough to say, well, you want independence, to support the SNP, because they can't tell the voters how they're going to deliver that.
Yeah. How do they paint a picture that says vote SNP, get independence? There is no path there. So that is a tough bit. If they can convince the voters, for example, that a supermajority for independence would be an unanswerable declaration to the UK government, they might be able to convince. I know.
Sounds like Salmon-esque rhetoric, that.
Yeah, that's a super majority and unanswerable, blah, blah. Yeah, aye, but
it's not going to work. But if they use that as a method to convince voters, then
That's their strategy. Yeah.
All right, I think we've run out of time. Thanks again to Dougie, to Mark, and to Hannah. You can listen to this episode of Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Music, or watch it on the Daily Record YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and the best bits of the podcast.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.